So welcome. I'm Jane. I'm Jane Allen for Amara, and I'm going to give you a very warm welcome and thank you all for giving up an hour of your precious time to join us in this conversation that we're going to have over the next hour. And it's particularly delightful to introduce the Amara team, which is Heidi, Johan, Maria, Pasua, and myself. And we have with us today fellow co-founder and Amara person, Bill Torbert. And we're also very, very pleased to welcome Kaija here as a guest. And we talk on our website about how we walk alongside our clients and the people we work with. Well, Kaija's a very special friend to Amara who's been walking along our side as a sponsor and a helper and a collaborator and as an associate. And so Kaija, thank you for coming along. So what are we going to do today? We're going to spend a bit of time just giving you a glimpse of what we do and how we do it. And our focus is here on what is the work of the Amara collaboration? What are your curiosities and interests? And how can we have a bringing together of your interests, your gifts, and also what we bring? And we want to use this opportunity to think about how individuals' development and organizational development come together. And we will be dipping into the pathway of development of our work, particularly around adult development. And that's where we're very, very pleased to have Bill with us talking about action inquiry, the GLP, and how the value in the world and in business and as individuals developing to a later stage is really helpful. And how do we do that? And Heidi will be skillfully bringing our guests together in a conversation that opens up our work and hopefully gives you a glimpse of the work and Kaija's story illustrating the work in some significant way. And then last but not least, connecting to you, your development, your curiosity, and why you're here. So we're hoping that Johan will guide us into thinking about our development and what we want out of this conversation. So welcome. So let's get started. And what we'd like to do is what we always do, which is to invite you to join a small group. You'll meet one or two other people there. So in those breakout rooms, who are you? What quality do you bring to this call? And what's your curiosity? So have a great conversation, and I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Jane. Well, that was really lovely to be able to check in. So thank you for leading us through that, Jane. Well, I'm going to talk to our guest this time, and I was going to make this into two different sections. So first, I wanted to, in a minute, invite you, Bill, in and just give a short overview and ask you to give an overview about the work you've done about developmental theory and adult development, the action logics and the GLP and action inquiry. And after that, to bring both of you in to talk about, well, all right, so we can develop, but what is the value of that? And also then dive into, well, what is really development? How does it happen? And also share some stories around it. But Bill, I'd like to first introduce you. So you have spent your life, one could say, it's your life work has been around adult development, developmental theory, the action logics, action inquiry, and also doing the GLP. And you've been the first person to bring in this into the leadership context and organizational work. So would you just, Bill, say first a little bit more about the action logic, so the different stages of human development that you've been working on?
Well, I first became curious about something that I didn't call action logics then, when I ran an upward bound program as a person too young to be in charge of anything, a program for students from backgrounds of poverty in the US. And what I couldn't understand, and the students were all supposed to be very difficult, and hated school, and we were trying to get them excited about school. It was a tough job, but what really surprised me was that the staff were often not very open to the differentness of the students. And I began to wonder why people have trouble questioning their own assumptions about how things ought to be. And so that was kind of the beginning of and why is it so difficult to get people to make what I later came to call double loop changes, that is, changes in their structure of the way they approach the world. And eventually I ran into developmental theory as it was understood by Erik Erikson. In fact, Erik Erikson is either from Sweden or Denmark. I can't remember which. Denmark? I don't know.
Yeah, Denmark.
Denmark, okay. And in looking back at this program, I formulated that it had been through organizational stages, and then I could see that there were possible leadership stages. The importance is all the early action logics never consider that they are a point of view on the world. They think that they're looking at the world directly. In the later action logics, you begin to become aware that you are approaching the world from a perspective, and that all the people you're dealing with have different perspectives, and you can't just assume that everybody has a shared perspective on what's going to happen. It has to be developed if there's going to be a shared perspective. People have to be able to talk across their different action logics, and that's difficult to begin. So eventually, in starting to try to measure people and create change processes, I came up with the measure that we now call the Global Leadership Profile. And while most of my work is very intimate and personal with organizations and with individuals, I wanted to have a scientific measure that was persuasive in terms of social science and, of course, large corporations that want to know why they should use the GLP. And so over many, many years, we kept changing and developing this instrument until we're very confident about it now. We have a lot of validity and reliability statistics, and we'll talk further about that. I'm not sure if I covered everything you wanted me to.
I think you did, and so because the next thing was that I wanted to talk about was about the GLP and the Global Leadership Profile, which you have developed also over these years. And one special thing that people are not familiar with is that it is actually a sentence stem based thing, and how that really gives the opportunity, or that people need to make a choice when starting or continuing a sentence, rather than choosing one from 1 to 10 or 1 to 6. So right. Could you say a little bit more about this sentence stem that we use in the GLP?
Yeah, so most social science measures are this kind of questionnaire that's pre-structured for you, and you're asked to circle a number from 1 to 7. You hate it, or you love it, or you don't care in the middle. And there's been a huge amount of research to show that these kinds of questionnaires do not explain very much. They don't predict things very well. This sentence completion test is really different, because instead of structuring the whole thing for you, it asks you to structure by how you respond to each sentence. And so it's in a sense taking a little sample of your behavior and then analyzing how you've structured the situation. And it turns out that that ends up being much better for predicting how people are going to behave. People at later stages, for example, use a lot more inquiry in their in their interactions with other people, precisely because they're aware that they can't be sure what the other person means right away or what the other person's perspective is. So that's a little bit more on.
Yeah, and then I just latest today did a GLP debrief, and sometimes the questions come up of someone saying, yeah, but I could have written this or something else, and maybe in another situation, but actually in the situation where we do the GLP, people have to make that choice, and it's a choice to put the attention somewhere. And I find that is really, and usually it is still something that is occurring in life. So you do talk about it not just being a logic, but actually being an action logic where we see that it things that translate into action.
Right, exactly. I mean, a lot of my research, or maybe one could say all of it, is about how people behave. So I'm interested in, is there a correlation between what a leader does every day and their GLP score? And the fact that the GLP sends completions, different people can take them differently. They and will respond very differently. Do they think this is a test that they are trying to do the best possible to get the best score, or do they think it's a bother and they're going to hurry through as quickly as possible? And that kind of attitude toward the test mirrors their attitude toward their everyday work. Do they have to hurry through everything? Or can they take the time to think more strategically and see how this instance fits in with a larger story?
Yeah, thank you. And just for those who just arrived, that we are talking about action logics, and so the stages of human development, which is Bill's life work called action logics, and the GLP, which is the measure that measures the stages of development, or the center of gravity of the development. There's one more thing I want to cover before we move into the conversation with Kaija, and that is about developmental action inquiry. So I find it so interesting that you have done a lot of work, but there's also other people who have been doing work around the stages of human development. But I think for me at least, the interesting part is the development. It's great to have kind of the map of the stages. And then your research shows that later stages of development does give the capacity to lead transformation in yourself and in teams and in organizations. So that's kind of the beef in leadership. But the really interesting part is like, well, okay, so how can we develop? And this is where action inquiry is I think, for me, one of the most brilliant work on how does development happen, and how is the intentional development happen. So if you say a few words about action inquiry, what is action inquiry, before we invite Kaija in as well?
Well, action inquiry, as you've suggested, is the dynamic aspect of the theory. It's how you get from one stage to another. The developmental stage theory is the comparative statics. And of course, if we want to lead better, and as we suggest, there are many reasons why at later action logics you are likely to lead better, then you want to know how to get to a later action logic. And this term action inquiry is the general answer to that. But of course, the question is, how do you do it? And of course, we create many exercises in our workshops to help people literally conduct a particular conversation that's been difficult before. Say you have a relationship that you care about, but that you're stuck in with your boss or with your boyfriend or whatever. And these exercises help you become aware of what your assumptions are when you talk to that person and how you might change those assumptions. And then we role play different ways you could act to have a more likely positive outcome to your conversation. But that's just one of many action inquiry processes. And we can maybe explore a few more of them before the end of this session.
Thank you, Bill. Well, so now I'd like to just shift a little bit of the focus and looking at, well, you, Bill, and then also inviting Kaija in around the value of your own development. And so there's one thing with Bill that I would like to bring forward, which is the when you were working at Carroll Graduate School of Management, you also served as a dean there, and the MBA program was ranking under 100 when you started, and it went to the top 25. And that is one of the things. So it's not just about a theory or a model that is outside, but actually something you have exercised yourself through life and has as a life path. And so, Kaija, I'd like to invite you in. You're the CEO of CoComms, and you've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. And I think you came into Amara around sometime in 2015 doing, as Jane was saying, some workshops, the GLP, collaborating and so on. And there is a few things I think you are a remarkable leader, as I've seen it. I think at least 3 times have I seen you turn around the company with your leadership. And the latest of these being in these COVID times. You just told me in a conversation before that the engagement surveys are better than they have ever been before in the company, even though you have been working remotely. So welcome, Kaija, and I'd like to check with you. If I just ask, what has been the value for you of the developing to later stages of development?
That's a huge question. Thank you. It's nice to be here. I think the value is of significant value for me, because without the development, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be the entrepreneur after 25 years. With the stress and with the challenges and everyday life issues that you deal with when you have people, when you have a staff, and there are client situations and all kinds of things popping out.
So I'd like to continue a little bit. So you talk now about the organizational part and being a leader. Is there, what might have been the value for you as like in your private life, as just to, also more broadly?
Yeah, I'm thinking, well, I've learned the GLP and what it tells about the conventional and post-conventional styles. But I think when I started out as an entrepreneur, I was the achiever, and I really wanted to reach my targets. I wanted to be a perfect mother, perfect wife, perfect leader, everything. And I wanted to manage it all. I wanted it to be a great picture. But then my relationship with my late husband, my ex-husband, we had a crisis and a series of crises, but I didn't want to give up. I was like, I need to manage this. I have decided that this will work out. So in the end, I was really desperate, because we went to the priest who was helping us, and we had series of conversations. Like, we met 5 times the priest who was listening, and she said that you will overcome this will be okay. And I was like, okay, let's see. Then after the 5th one, my husband said, well, what's the use? I've given up a long time ago. And I was like, this was all in vain. This was nothing. But then there started my journey forward, because I realized that it was really important for me to continue, and for our children and for the relationship not to end there, but in a different form. We departed, but we are still cooperating. We are understanding each other, but there was no future. So in a sense, I think that the development came through a hardship, but it was really good for me personally and also in the working life. Like Bill was saying, you think that everybody sees the world the same way, and you don't even listen. But when you realize you need to lead the conversation, you need to listen to other people, then you learn. But it's not easy.
Thank you, Kaija. And you showed that of the willingness to actually engage in development and during those really difficult times. Well, Bill, I'd like to move over to you for a moment and see what has been the value of development for you, both personally and in your leadership. over the years?
Well, I guess the most general thing I could say in terms of leadership is that the action inquiry approach makes it possible to raise questions about what the assumptions are, not only of individual people, but of conversations. And so working with teams, I gradually realized that teams can get stuck and there can be distrust and so forth. But if you know how to raise questions in the present without judging any particular person in the group, you can unstick the group as a whole. And I was lucky to have a lot of training in how encounter groups engage with one another and how to deal with situations of high emotion. So I think just that sense of being able to intervene in a group at a particular moment and help it change direction rather than assuming that you have to keep working within the current definition of the situation. So that's probably on the work side. On the personal life side, well, I would say that one wonderful thing about action inquiry is how it's helped me with my 3 sons. I think I was aware that it was not going to help to try to preach development to them or tell them to develop, and that I had to be very careful, since I was sort of a person who was publicly known for these things, not to impose them on my sons. And they've been very good about not reading anything I've written and paying no attention to my professional beliefs. But then to my astonishment, I hear them at various points, not mimicking me, but definitely they've somehow by osmosis acquired some of these skills. Unfortunately, they sometimes use them against me, but other than that, it's pretty good. And also, I should say that there have been at not infrequent times, we've had to have a real head-to-head confrontation on something. And again, when I grew up, I was rather diplomatic and scared of conflict, and the various work on action inquiry helped me to be able to withstand conflict or deal with it. When one of my sons didn't want to talk to me for a while because I'd written a letter to him and his girlfriend, which he thought was terrible and not constructive, I was able to stand the 2 months before they split up, and he came back and said, "You were absolutely right." So, I mean, I knew when I sent the letter that it was not going to immediately be acceptable. Anyway, sorry to go on, but.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think that is I resonate with both of you in that. I know I had quite an important thing as well to sell my ex-husband and my joint house, and I know before learning about action inquiry, I would probably just have said, this is what I want to do, and instead I engaged in making it a collaborative inquiry to all be able to contribute, and it being such a more smooth process, which these are things that could get so easily be like having people go into very difficult relationships, and so that is something I started to think about when you talked about those things, Bill, and also the intervening in organizations of how the interventions are so important for transformation. But if you're looking at well, how does the development happen? And if I ask you, Kaija, first, and then I think this is one of the really, you both kind of told a little bit about some stories about transformation. But if, for example, if you're thinking maybe from your conventional to post-conventional, what might have been some events and what was like important in you moving from one action logic to another? And would you, Kaija, have an example? And then I'm going to ask you too, Bill.
It's directly from Bill's book. It's through hardships and crises. So don't be afraid of crises if you want to develop in your life. That's I don't find any other solutions. those are the big steps. But of course, the intentional development learning, like doing every day and wanting to, if I want to develop myself, I do it every day. It starts now and from me. So that's what I do as well. So I want to study. I want to, I do the action inquiry. I'm present in the moments. I do meditation. I talk to people and things like that. And I study things. But I think the main leaps, the main steps have been through crisis, both in personal life, but also in the organizational life.
Yeah, thank you, Kaija. So, and that is, yeah, how we use those crises. So a crisis doesn't necessarily mean we develop as such, but it is an opportunity, an invitation if we like to see it. And I think you point to something other quite important, which is about the discipline. So if we do engage, and when we do engage in action inquiry and in development of the discipline of actually continue doing it, whatever it is that you decide to do as for the development. What about you, Bill? Do you have a story or something that illustrates a little bit more about maybe a move from conventional to post-conventional?
Yeah, I think maybe the best one might be when I was in college, and of course I had no idea about developmental theory at that time and didn't know that I was trying to develop. But I had a summer job in Somalia with an oil exploration company. And after 2 weeks of being the lowest man on the totem pole in the operation, 2 guys that were senior to me had to go to another operation in another part of the country. And I was suddenly promoted to being the chief of the underground exploration process. And I couldn't even speak the same language as the Somalo guys that were doing the actual work. I was scared out of my mind about it. And then the second day I was in charge, we ran into you'd plow these lines and you'd set these underground dynamite and explode them, and we ran right into a nomadic village that was temporary. And the folks in the village were up in arms about the fact that we were going to plow right through the middle of their village. And I felt as though I had to, because my boss was a very intimidating guy. But I decided to stop for the day and go back and talk to him and come back the next day. And he said, "Oh, it's fine that you stopped, but you really should go ahead, because we have the right to, according to the government. And if we bow to these squatters, as I think he called them, then everybody will try to stop us." So I went back the next morning very scared and I went very early. I think we got there around 6 a.m. And I was hoping to get through the village before they even woke up. But instead, the whole village was wide awake and took me to a hut where a tremendously old man with almost no teeth came out. He was evidently the chief. And in a very whining voice, he asked me whether I thought it was just to go. He was suddenly like a kind of Socratic teacher. And I didn't think it was just. It seemed to me that we shouldn't be destroying their village. But I was tremendously scared that I'd get fired. And my father was the ambassador, and I would then bring shame upon my family's home. But I actually did decide not to go through the village, and we went to the other side. We finished for the day, and I got back to the camp, and it took me about an hour to get my nerve up. I finally went in and talked with him, and he said, "Oh, you got a lot accomplished today. No problem. We've got thousands of miles of underground to chart. Missing 1 kilometer won't matter." And this taught me that I had better listen to my own inner instinct. Of course, it doesn't always work out as well as it did that time, But I was very, very relieved that I hadn't simply followed orders and gone through. And I think that really helped me begin to get to the redefining action logic.
Thank you, Bill. So I guess that and other stories are in your book, the autobiographical book that we also are going to share at the end, that is going to be launched within a month. But now is the time. So thank you for Bill and Kaija. You're going to continue in the breakout rooms. So those of you who are lucky to have the two of you are, you never know who that's going to be. But then I'll hand over now to you, Johan, to take us into actually looking at our own transitions and transformations in conversation. So Johan, would you step in?
Yes, truly. All right. So we have about 10 minutes in a breakout room, and I want you to discuss or have a dialogue around how these stories we just heard resonate with your own development, and in what ways do they inspire you to continue your own journey. And just to sum up a little bit of what I heard the word crisis, and we have this idea in development of either we break down or we break through, and I think many of us have this experience. But again, so how do the stories you just heard resonate with your own developmental journey, and in what way does it inspire you to continue your own journey? So let's see you on the other side. That was actually very interesting what I just heard just before I came back. Now I would like to sum up a little bit of what happened out there in the rooms, and maybe if some of you have some questions, it would be very nice for you to share a question in the chat. And in fact, we just had a question. So when you're writing, that would be interesting to either you or Kaija or you, Bill. Because in the chat, one was asking, so one thing is the individual developmental journey, and often we tend to focus on the individual level. But what about the collective and the teams we're in, because that should be important too. That could be a good place to start. Maybe for you, I can see you're waving your head, Bill.
Yes, well, as I said at the beginning, I actually was focused on a developmental theory of organizations when I first discovered both the organizational and the individual development. And it has always seemed to me, and the other versions of developmental theory and developmental measurement tend to be focused entirely on the individual level. And I agree completely that you can talk about teams as having a center of gravity at the opportunist or the expert or the collaborative inquiry level, and also organizations. And so the three are equally important. For an early action logic manager, it's very helpful if they have later action logic managers in the same group, because those people will start to confront the person at the earlier action logic about making diplomatic decisions just to please people, when in fact the more productive decision would have been different. So yes, absolutely. If you want to have a real impact on the outer world, be aware of the organizational stages and the team stages, as well as the individual stages.
That's great. And you, Kaija, I was thinking, because you have also been working with teams and people. One thing is you as a CEO, but I guess, what about your teams? And can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, for me, it has been really helpful to have later action logics in my management group, because it's easier to work out the situations when there are people that are like-minded. I've had times and phases when all the people that were in positions to make decisions, they were conventional, and I had trouble to get my views through. I knew I was listening, I was talking, but somehow it didn't resonate with the team. So it's really important who you have in the team, that you have like, you can have conventional, but it's good to have post-conventional people as well. Those that are ready to question and bring out new ideas and find new ways to go through, because these times require a new approach. So definitely the team and team will follow the leader, the mental leader, and if it's someone from the earlier action logics, it becomes the norm easily.
Thank you. And I was wondering, there was another talk in the chat about moral development. So how does moral development fit to the action logics or your own development in general? Maybe you can, both of you can.
Well, there's a very close match between moral and political development and the action logic. So the opportunist action logic is a Hobbesian view of the world. It's a win-lose. Life is nasty, brutal, and short because there really isn't any cooperation. It's a Trumpian world that gets created by the opportunistic action logic. And the diplomatic action logic is described in political philosophy by Rousseau and his views that the will of all should run things. And then the expert action logic, which tries to move forward on some basic principles, is like Kant's philosophy. So you see that these action logics are reflected in the philosophy of moral development at different points. And the most recent one is the work of John Rawls in A Theory of Justice. And he actually intentionally incorporates developmental theory into his theory of political justice. And in my forthcoming book, you'll see that I critique him and suggest another step beyond his perspective. But yes, to me, if a person takes a moral position that utilitarianism is the way to count happiness, that's a relatively undeveloped point of view. It's only external things in the world that count up as having value, and not virtues or principles. So my view of moral action is based on interweaving the different philosophies that have come before now. That's very abstract, but there you go.
So maybe we could bring it to a more personal level. Thank you very much, Bill. So Kaija, what about moral development from your perspective in your own personal world as a person being responsible for a lot of people?
Yeah, it's a big issue, and I don't know the big theoretical words, but I do how I appreciate values and integrity, being true to myself and listen to others. And I believe that we all are one, and although we have different perspective, different views on world, so I respect others as I respect myself. And if I harm others, I only harm myself. So I think it's the love that guides, I think, in the end, that you respect others, and there are no people that are better than the others, and values and integrity are really important.
All right, I think I want to end on that. That was very beautiful. Love, integrity, and for your heart. So, and I will bring the attention over to Heidi.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Johan. And I wanted to bring a few things here at the end. And that was just like, I understand that this has been just a very short way of coming into a conversation around the action logics, around the GLP, action inquiry, and development as such, and the value of it. And of course, there's loads and loads and loads to learn about it. And if you are curious to learn more, we do have a workshop coming up in March, a foundation where you can learn about the action logics in yourself, in others, how it works, and action inquiry. Also, there is a one around organizations and teams where you bring in your own case to work with it and learn from others. And we also, people who want to certify to use the GLP, we have that starting in May. Then you need to do the foundation as well. And you can, of course, also take the GLP, do developmental coaching if you're interested. And our main work is with organizational transformation programs. So if that is something you have on your plate, you thinking about, well, how can I bring in more maturity in my organization, we are happy to talk. And I also wanted to just remember of the Street Smart book, which is the Practices of Transformation, and Bill's upcoming book, NUM School, the Theater of Inquiry, coming up in about a month. Well, with that, I want to say thank you, Kaija, for coming here and sharing your wisdom. Thank you, Bill, for sharing this hour with us. Thank you, Jane, for opening us up so beautifully, and Johan for hosting this, and Maria and Persoa being in the background of Amara to letting people in and doing breakout groups. And of course, all of you who took the time to be here with all of us and share and share your own stories. And I wanted to say that what we've been wanting to do is actually to start doing these kind of gatherings, online gatherings, webinars once a month, and to bring in different perspectives into development. So it is around development. And I think we have one of our next guests in this call, actually. The next one is going to be on March 16th, and it's going to be around trust. Thank you, everybody. Have a really nice evening, or if it is your morning, if it's your midday, and hope to see you in 1 month again, or online in our newsletter somewhere. Be well, take care, and hope to see you soon.